Bonjour à tous et à toutes. J'invite les
Good afternoon, everyone. Please be seated if you have not yet done so. We are going to begin this session. I am Tom Val. I'm a senior advisor at Res Publica. You met Sophie Guillat this morning, together with the MOTS. We helped organize this Borders Forum. You see, there are many of us on stage this afternoon. I have many people to help me along with this debate. I'm going to introduce our guests immediately. First of all, I'll say a few words on our topic. Since yesterday, we've organized somewhat traditional roundtables, but this afternoon, we thought that we would change the format somewhat. We have called this citizens debate. You'll understand why we have called this round table as such. And our topic is, what is the place of civil society and young people in the construction of the cross-border territories? In order to frame this debate, I think that we've heard this since yesterday. There are many things happening in terms of cross-borders, programs, initiatives being launched, different mechanisms that make possible cross-border cooperation. And these mechanisms, of course, affect mostly the people who live in these cross-border living areas and respond to the concrete needs of the people living in these territories. And I think that it is easy to say that it could be useful for these different policies to associate and to involve all those people who live in these border areas, because those are the people who benefit directly from these mechanisms. And so we might well ask the question not why involve civil society and citizens in the cross-border territories, but rather how. How can we involve closely civil society and young people in particular, since we have with us three young people who can tell us a little bit more about this? How can they be associated in the construction of the cross-border areas? And it is a major question, but I'm not here on my own to answer this question. I would like to ask you one question before introducing you. If I may, I would like you to answer on Slido for those people who are virtually connected. Well, you've had the link since this morning. For those people that are here in the hall with us, is it possible to put on the screen the link, the Slido link there? There we are. Slido.com, hashtag Borders Forum. So the question we wish to ask you is, in your opinion, are there several opportunities that are easily accessible to young people who wish to become involved in the cross-border territories? And so, depending on whether you agree or not with this statement, you can answer multiple choice answers. And in the meantime, I'm going to introduce our guests, and we'll come back to your answers. So who shall I start with? Let's start with our three young people, and then we'll finish with our three institutional representatives. So on my left, Linus Bergauer. You are a German citizen. You currently live in Metz, in France. And you are a volunteer in the greater region. You can actually explain what this is. And you are in the UNESCO club in Metz, and you can perhaps tell us more about what you do. Thank you, Linus. And then we have Bektha. Hello. Well, you have a somewhat broader cross-border CV. You can also tell us more about this. You have taken part last year in the Interreg Volunteer Youth program last year. You're no longer part of this program, but you did quite a few things within this Interreg program, so you can tell us about it. And you come from Strasbourg. And then Irune, you are Spanish, and you have taken part in a mechanism that was set up in the Pyrenees, the Trans-Pyrenean Youth Forum, with several young people who have worked with you, and perhaps you can also tell us a little more about this. And with our three young civil society representatives, we have three slightly older representatives, but only very slightly. Institutional representatives, Mrs. Chantal Jouanno, you're president of the French National Commission for Public Debate, and you'll explain what this is. You guarantee the right to participate in all sorts of policies and projects. Then we have Gaëtane Ricard-Nihoul. You have a very large CV. I'm not going to go into detail, but you are, amongst other things, a member of the Common Secretariat for the Conference on the Future of Europe. That's finished its work last month, and you've also worked within the European Commission. So you can also tell us about this. And then Mrs. Álvarez, you come from Tomiño in Spain, on the border with Portugal, and you are co-chair of a Euro city of a cross-border alliance with the neighboring Cervera municipality. And you've set up various cross-border initiatives over the last few years. And we will be delighted to hear more about this too. So before we start, could we perhaps have the answers to the question that I asked you earlier? Well, let's see if we have a few answers. So here are the answers. So overall, many people either mostly agree or not really agree. So you're really split. Perhaps what we can observe is that there are initiatives that exist today to involve young people, and we'll talk about this with our three young people in a moment. These initiatives do exist, and there are several of them. From an institutional point of view and from an association point of view, the institutions don't necessarily do everything. So these initiatives do exist, but it seems that the involvement of young people in these initiatives doesn't go without saying. There might be a few obstacles to that involvement. So the question is, what can we do to promote that involvement? What are the possible spaces in which young people could become involved? If there are any obstacles, what can we do to remove them? So I think I've spoken enough for now, and I will let our three young people to tell us about their own experience in terms of cross-border initiatives. And we will start with Linus. Yes, Linus, you had a few words. You can tell us what you do.
Many thanks for the invitation and the introduction, and also many thanks to the MOT for the invitation and the organization of this wonderful event. And I'm really, really happy to be here with you today and to talk about a topic which personally for me is very important, which I'm very excited about. And because I'm really interested in voluntary work in border regions. So just a few words of explanation. Since last October, I'm a volunteer in a voluntary corps in a very small organization for political education. And so I could really talk to you about many interesting aspects, but most of our works also deals with questions of mobility, transborder mobility. So before the event, I just tried to think about points which are relevant and what aspects could prevent young people from taking part in such activities. And I would like to become more concrete. So I would really like to take you on a journey through the world of volunteering. And I would like to highlight 3 main points which are pertinent here. And I would like to think whether there may be other points which make it easier to participate. So I would say we will just start in a chronological order. So let's start with the first point. And I would like to start with my first point, namely it's the problem that it can be difficult to find a suitable project for oneself. I can very well remember the moments when I personally took advantage of a voluntary position abroad, and it all started with great motivation, but then I just felt a little bit overwhelmed because there were so many requirements associated with the programs. There were some double structures, and the recruitment processes were not always transparent. So this can lead to the fact that one goes the easiest way. And when it comes to voluntary work, I think my advice would be just to take some time to think what's really right for a person, because I had a different maybe I had different expectation about some programs, and some programs might seem relevant but then turn out to be to be quite different. So it's very important. That's a very important aspect of volunteering. So obviously all these preferences are very individual, and from my perspective I can say that the application process for my current project appealed to me very much. It was possible to apply for a specific project and not, like this was in the case with other organizations, just to apply to an organization and then be assigned to a project. So if you inform yourself well and if you speak to the responsibles for a project, then you stand a really good chance to find a suitable project for oneself. And once you find a project, and of course the preparations don't stop there, they only start. And this brings me to my second problem. So that's voluntary placement abroad involves a lot of bureaucracy. So we don't need to discuss this point at length, but this is an important point. And well, Germany is always seen as the leader when it comes to bureaucratic matters and making things complicated. But after having spent some time in France, I'm not so sure if Germany is really the most bureaucratic country. But the good message is that as a volunteer, you don't really have to deal with all the administrative matters yourself. Because all these matters are dealt with by the organization for which one works. So there is some support. However, all these procedures could be simplified. So after having clarified the first 2 points, so we found the correct project, we signed the contract, and then the real work begins. However, at this point, there can be some doubts which might surface. And now I would like to touch upon my last point, and this is the bias or prejudice that a placement abroad might be quite fun, but I mean, to what extent is it useful for the future career or for the future as such? Many young people think that, well, basically this is like a free of charge break from reality, And of course, my project has enabled me to travel a lot and to take part at wonderful events like this one. But nevertheless, sometimes I feel like on a holiday. However, maybe this shouldn't be regarded as a negative aspect, and maybe it shouldn't distract from the fact that volunteer placement abroad also enables access to many opportunities and also plays an important role in non-formal education. For example, there are some new practical skills which one can learn. You are becoming more independent. You have greater empathy. All these points are also complemented by other advantages such as improving one's language skills or intercultural competencies. So now I've summarized all individual advantages. However, I haven't even touched upon about the social use of voluntary work. So the aspects of work and fun don't really have to be in contrast to each other. They can be combined. And this is also my personal summary. I can only say that I've been enjoying my current activity very much, and I think that I have learned a lot on this level. And well, I would like to end on this very rather positive note, and now we have arrived at the end of our little journey. And I hope that I have managed to convince at least some of you that a voluntary placement abroad doesn't have to be complicated, boring, or pointless. It can be the opposite. It can be easy to organize, it can be exciting, and it can also be enriching. So I really look forward to the further continuation of this very exciting roundtable, and I would like to pass on the floor to the moderator.
Pour ce joli plaidoyer. Tu mets un peu la pression aux deux autres pour la suite.
Well, thank you very much for this. Irune, perhaps you can tell us about what happens in the Trans-Pyrenean Youth Forum. And I would like to remind you, particularly for those people who are connected remotely, please don't hesitate to ask questions to our three young people who are here with us to share their experiences. If you have any observations or questions, we will ask them those questions. So please don't hesitate. Also, here in this hall, if you have any questions to ask, don't hesitate to do so. So, Irune?
Yes, of course. I want to thank you to be given the opportunity to take part in this forum. And before I start talking about my experience in the Trans-Pyrenean Youth Forum, I want to tell us about my experience of a youth living in a cross-border community. In my case, this is Euskadi, the Basque Country. I was born and grew up in Euskadi, in the Basque Country, but my dad is a ski guide and mountaineer. So we always had a second home in Villanueva, in the Pyrenees, in the province of Huesca. And my life has always been close linked to the mountains. But when you are a kid, often if you are not brought closer to political topics or to debates, you don't realize the reality you live in as a community near a border. That was my case until about 2 years ago. A little bit by chance, a friend of my dad sent to me a link to inform me about the Trans-Pyrenean Youth Forum, and I decided to sign up. I'll explain my general reasons, and then I'll tell you more in detail about what we do in it. I decided to sign up because apart from feeling very close to the Pyrenees as an area for leisure and sport, I believe the Pyrenees are a cross-border region that that it's very rich in culturally rich. We have 7 or 8 languages in this cross-border area. They are not just languages that are spoken in both territories. They are languages that get over that border. We've got the Basque language, Euskera, that is called in the Basque country, in Gaëtane, Iparralde, Huesca. We've got Catalan spoken in Catalonia and also in the southeast of Occitanie. Also the French that is spoken in France and in Andorre, because we've got Andorre as well, and there is a Spanish language and Occitane that it's very much in disuse these days, unfortunately. So I thought it was very interesting to take part and to learn how to manage these cross-border topics and issues and all the shared culture along our border. My first few sessions in the forum were regional online sessions. I worked with my colleagues from Euskadi, the Spanish Basque country, through 3 or 4 sessions, online sessions, where we prepared the different themes that were going to be debated on the face-to-face forum that took place in Huesca. During these sessions, different working groups were created. One of them worked on the intercultural topics, then transport, the possibility of traveling between the different regions. The other group talked about work and emancipation. And a third group where different topics were debated around climate change, gender equality, race equality, etc. I work in the working group about culture, so I'm telling you more in detail about the work on this topic. But then we prepare a letter by group, and then we and in our website you can find this letter, as well as a video that we prepare explaining the different topics we think as youth that need to be worked on. As an experience, it was a beautiful experience. After the online sessions, we all got together in a hostel in the mountains in the town of Jaca. We did a presentation per region. It was a really good start and very enriching, because we realized that as well as all the cultural similarities, there are other similarities as well, by way of the fact that living in a mountain border, it means that traditions have been preserved. And we have traditional music in the Basque country that we dance and sing in a way, and that in Catalonia are sung and danced in a different way, but the base melody is the same one. They were not in Occitania, they were not in Iparralde, so we started in a presentation by region, and we ended up with a common presentation for everyone. The following days were days of work on the different topics, which as youth we thought needed to be worked on in more detail. We talked about the determination of the people on the border regions, about the protection of our mother tongues. We talked about the difficulties in sharing culture between different regions due to the lack of common cultural management. In our case, we said that it was much easier for us to find a film that has been filmed in Madrid or Andalusia, because legally we're in the same country, than accessing a film that was filmed in Hendaya or Bayonne, which towns which are much more close to us, geographically speaking, because that cultural exchange hasn't been promoted. So those things are easily accessible to us. Once we cover the different issues, we recognize a number of proposals were made. They were included in the video and put in our website, and we share them with the other working groups. Also to find out what they had been discussing about. And on the last day, we organized a forum with the different representatives from the regions, and we explained our concerns to them, and we presented to them our proposals that we thought were viable, and how to make them known. That's one of our current problems, the obstacle between the institutions, the adults, and youth. Nowadays, hardly bother contacting the newspapers, or people don't watch the news as much as they used to in the past, or as I remember it happened when I was young. I used to watch on the family, but we're also talking about how we could get these tools we had designed and get them to other youth for them to use it. I don't know if anybody has a question. I'll be happy to answer it. Thank you.
Ça marche. Merci beaucoup, Irune. Je laisse la parole à Bektha pour terminer sur ce partage d'expérience.
Good afternoon. So thank you as well to the MOT for inviting me. So as Tom said, I am actually French from Strasbourg. So it might be strange that I'm speaking English, but I have been away from France for a while now, and I'm a little bit more comfortable in English at the moment, but my brain is turning back into French these last few days. So maybe a few words will mix up. So I apologize for the translation. So actually, I grew up in Strasbourg. I have quite a few experience in volunteering, but also cross-border cooperation or youth involvement. But today I have been invited mostly to speak about the Interreg Volunteer Youth program. So for those of you that don't know what it is, I will present it quickly, and I invite you actually to go look in the interregyouth.com website for more information, because I will mostly speak about my own experience through the program. So Interreg Youth, Volunteer Youth, IV for the little short nickname, is a program launched in 2017 by DG Regio with IBR, Association of European Border Region. It allows young people aged 18 to 30 years old to volunteer either in an Interreg program or in an Interreg project for 2 to 6 months. As a volunteer, you can be either an Interreg project partner, so as the name suggests, you get hosted and get involved in a project, and then you help either in the implementation of the activities of the project or help also in the dissemination of the results and the visibility. Well, you can also be an Interreg reporter, which is then in an Interreg program, in a different strands or even IPA or any programs. And then you're more involved into the communication activities and also into the dissemination and helping and supporting the program, gaining visibility and reaching out to the local communities and to the larger public. So last year, I was myself an Interreg reporter at the Interreg France-Wallonie-Flanderen program. So it's a cross-border program between France and Belgium. And I was, during my time there, I know the program IV for a while already, but I'm very happy I had the chance to do it last year because I was able to witness the transition period between two programmation, Interreg 5 and Interreg 6. And I had been given the chance to actually actively participate in this new programmation and actually listen, but also give my opinion into what should be the new strategy or what can be put into place either in the communication aspect of it, but also into the objective and priorities of young people living in cross-border regions or being involved also in the decision-making process. And that was actually quite important for me because I really felt that I was listened to, but also taken into consideration. Like when I was talking, I like to call them my colleagues, maybe they're not really my colleagues, I guess, because I was an Interreg volunteer, but I was among Interreg professionals, but I did feel equal, and I did feel very integrated to the team and valued. And my expertise, I don't know if I can call it my expertise, I'm too young maybe for it, was actually asked for, and that I was able to contribute with my knowledge, and either by very practical activities as social media or articles about projects, results, or impact on the program area, but also in a more like strategy way on how to implement the next communication strategy to reach out beneficiaries, but also project leaders or other stakeholders in the area. And that was actually what I was looking for. So I grew up in a border city. And honestly, it's maybe strange, but up to 2 years ago, COVID obviously, I never grew up with this idea of a border. And for me, I never physically experienced the border. I knew it, obviously I know that across the Rhin is not France anymore, it's not Strasbourg anymore, but in my way of living, of being, that was the same space. It was a different city, but it was the same space. That was my space, my life. And suddenly, well, border shutting, like I did felt the need to like understand better what was happening, what was actually being done, and what did territorial cooperation actually means at the local level. And that's how I decided to get involved as a volunteer in a cross-border cooperation program. And I definitely learned so much about the role of each actors and how actually this EU dimension does reflect at the local, regional area. And if I may say, it's a very strange thing, but I did this by passion, and I volunteered in many different other ways, also through the Solidarity Corps in the past, and other types. I did my service civic also, I did many other programs, but IVY, Interreg Volunteer Youth, is actually very different. In the way it's designed, the goal that it has of raising awareness among civil society and actually involving young people and creating this like possibility of mixing these professionals, this little bubble of Interreg with people that are actually the end beneficiaries of it, is quite exceptional, because I was able to understand better what it does. Like I could see projects that did actually have an impact in both sides of a border and how they did respond to the needs of a population that somehow at some point faced challenges that were only due to a border, that we forget I think now we remember, we remember this last couple of years that actually the borders are still here. They're not physically here, but we still have like little obstacles that we need to tackle together. And by doing this volunteering, I did understand better. And I decided, even if I am young, I still have a lot of things to learn. These last 2 days, I learned amazing things of what is happening in all your border regions and what action you're taking into place. But I also have ideas and skills that I really wanted to put into place to contribute to this cooperation. And one challenge I really faced during this volunteering, and even actually after that, when I tried to explain what is IV and what is an Interreg volunteer, is a lot of people in institutions or stakeholders are not used to have young people around them. They're not used to see us as active members of the decision process or of the implementation of projects. And when I would say, hi, I'm a volunteer for this program, they're like, oh, okay, you're doing your internship. No, I'm not doing an internship. Oh, so you're a trainee? No, no, actually I'm a volunteer. I am here to contribute, to give my skills. I'm here to learn, obviously, because I do not know exactly everything, but I'm here to give you something as well, and not just to take. And somehow, but also with my friends, somehow the volunteering aspect of contributing, and maybe sometimes to contributing at an institutional level, has a bad image, I think, of, oh, but it's not a job, but what are you doing? Well, actually, I am helping into changing and creating my own future in my region. And that's something that by this volunteering program, I think slowly, I mean, there is already more than 700 young people that contributed these last 5 years, so it's already something. But slowly putting these volunteers into this more institutional environment does get people used to the idea of young people do have a voice in this process. That's my experience.
Merci pour ces témoignages. C'était des jolis plaidoyers, donc merci à tous les trois.
Thank you very much. That was very interesting. We have questions on Slido. I don't know if among our three speakers you have things to say. You've got a lot to say about citizen involvement. We'll allow you the time to speak to us about that too. Do you have reactions on what you have already heard? I'm talking to you three people and to the three people in the room to see if you have any questions. I have also some questions on Slido, particularly for Irene on the question of languages. I think that's also an interesting question about language, particularly Mrs. Ricard-Nihoul on the question of Europe. In any case, on the question of languages, Irene, can you tell us what languages were used for the exchanges in the Trans-Pyrenean Forum?
Yes, of course. One of the first decisions taken was that each region had the right and the need to promote their own language and to make it known to others. So we were given the opportunity to communicate in whatever language we decided we wanted to use amongst us, the youth, depending on who you were with, you communicated with that person in the common language you had with them. And then the final letter was written. I'm not sure because I work on the editing the video, but I think it was written in Spanish, English, and French. But the video, it's in the video you have separate clips, video clips with different people, each one of them talking about a specific point, and each person talked in their own in the language of choice. So you've got Basque, Spanish, French, and Catalan. The one we couldn't get anyone to talk to is the Occitan because it's not much in use. So there were people who said that in the primary school they were taught a few songs, a few words, but there wasn't anyone who could speak it fluently, so we couldn't include it.
Je pense que cette question de la langue, on parlait des freins à l'implication des jeunes à l'échelle transfrontalière.
I think the question of languages, we were talking about brakes on youth involvement. We don't necessarily think about this in France, but it can be limiting. Maybe Mrs. Ricard-Nihoul, you have this experience on the conference on the future of Europe, which is not really a cross-border, it's more transnational, but you had a challenge with this multilingualism, which you needed to manage. Could you tell us a bit more about how you did that to organize this citizen consultation at the scale of so many countries? How did you manage languages? And did you find other practical breaks, concrete breaks in the mechanism that you used? Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. First of all, to summarize our conference on the future of Europe briefly, this was an experience that we had never seen before at a European participative level, an inspirational level. It was organized by the 3 EU institutions, the 3 main ones, the Commission, the Parliament, and the Council. And it lasted all of last year and was based on 3 pillars, which we called the 3 Ps. A platform, an online platform, a multilingual platform. We'll get back to that because we were able to make a lot of progress in that area. Panels, so pan-European citizen panels, which were also multilingual, 24 languages for plenary work and 4 or 5 languages for working group. And finally, a plenary. And that was also very interesting since for the first time we mixed the political elements, political representatives with organized civil society and a group of citizens who brought panels of citizens with 24 languages at all times in plenary and working groups, depending the language which we were looking for. What I can say to you at the moment is 2 things which are both positive. The first thing is that we overcame any skepticism on this matter. We were told it would never work. Transnational democracy in 24 languages won't work. Do it locally and then do it at a European level, but don't do pan-European straight away. But in fact, it works. It needs a lot of organization. It needs investment in interpretation, but it does work. And I would go further. The second positive lesson of this experience is that it brings something more. That is clear, which is, of course, what each of you has mentioned, which is fundamental, which is intercultural exchanges with somebody who is different, but as you have said, each of you in your own way, all with a lot of similarities, even though there are different languages and different cultural contexts. That brings a richness in exchanges, but it also brings something which was not perhaps very well known in a deliberative democracy, which is a different rhythm to deliberations. In other words, the fact that there is interpretation gives a rhythm to exchanges which is even more pacific when you're listening to it, because we know that citizen assemblies often are seeking a consensus and collective recommendations and are quite pacific, consensual in political areas, as we know, which are generally more, see more conflict. But the difference of languages and the fact of making an effort to go to the other person to understand them added another aspect, another level of listening. Maybe I'll stop there and come back to other aspects of our conference later. Maybe another subject which is seen in Slido 2 on question of physical borders and their closure as well. Maybe towards you, Mrs. Álvarez, in terms of what you put in place locally with your commune on the border. We know that during COVID, having this border was a major challenge, and you also needed to defend the rights of people in your Eurocity that included access to people in the neighboring commune. Could you tell people what was put in place, particularly this Organization for the Protection of Human Rights, and what you put in place across the borders, and how did you respond to this challenge of a closed border, and how did this Organization for the Protection of Human Rights was able to respond?
Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you very much to Eurocities Vila Tomiño. It's a pleasure to be here at this forum where we talk with young people who are the future of Europe. It's great, it's an honor for me to be here. I come from a border area which is in the periphery of the periphery, so to speak, between Galicia and Portugal. We have a Euro city with about 25,000 people and a long history of cooperation where we share services, and we have also joint governance. On top of this, by accident, we've been participating for a long time in the governance of our city council by young people. We are a city of childhood, and it's a special condecoration given by UNICEF where young people participate in the local governance. These particular cases you were referring to are interesting because we have two very interesting projects funded by Interreg. One is called the participative trans-border budget. And thanks to that, we ensure that 20 organizations from Galicia and Portugal work hand by hand on a project that has got either a social, cultural, or sports implications. And we do it with very little money, 20,000 euros per year. And we spend in general altogether 80,000 euros during the last 5 years we've been doing it, except during times of COVID. And these small projects that are very localized, working together with people, focusing on them, contribute to forge a European citizen. Another interesting project is the one that we created for defenders of trans-border citizens. There are two individuals. We have a Galician and a Portuguese individual. They've been appointed by the government, but they don't have any political view. They don't have a salary and they don't belong to any political party. And these two individuals solve the local problems that citizens have to face in that territory. Problems such as how do we share the public swimming pool, for example. The modality to pay may not be valid for the Spaniards who travel to Portugal, or something which was very important to us and is relating to young people. It's the way in which we draft a report in which we talk about the mobility restrictions for young people and children on one side and the other side of the border. Milano Cerveira says, together we are together by a river. We are joined by this physical border because thanks to this river, we are communicated. It's 180 meters in the end of the day, which is nothing. Young people and children on one side and the other, they cannot carry out joint activities in the education sector. The Tomiño children, they have a lot of difficulties to travel to another country to see the local museum in Cerveira, which is 190 meters from them. And they have to comply with the same requirements that they would have to fulfill to travel to, let's say, Germany. So this report, among other documents, enabled us to have a resolution program, a very good program that has been sponsored by the European Commission that aims at resolving problems at a European scale, dealing with all the internal European borders. And basically, we are talking about internal borders that represent 30% of the inhabitants. We live, a lot of Europeans, next to a border. So many people in many different circumstances, and projects such as Resolution help to bring visibility of these projects, which are sometimes not well seen. And as an anecdote, I was talking about a grandfather who was traveling with his granddaughter, and he found out that what he was doing, it was illegal because he needed to carry out all the documentation of his granddaughter to cross the border. So what we are trying to do with our cooperation project is to enable and facilitate the life of people, the everyday situations. So that's what citizens really need. And I think these are the bases to to settle this European citizenship idea and not look at Europe as an obstacle, as a barrier, but look at Europe as an opportunity and an advantage. With regard to the volunteering sector, I understand you perfectly, because if you're a volunteer in Tomiño, well, we also receive European volunteering staff, and we had that question. So we have a tradition in our Eurocity to receive volunteers from Europe. Congratulations, because you do a great work, and we encourage you to continue doing it. Thank you very much.
Peut-être sur l'implication des jeunes en
So
particulier.
a question on the involvement of young people, particularly Mrs. Álvarez. We've seen what you've seen to work on the protection of human rights for young people at the Eurocité. Have you, in the mechanisms you've put in place in a cross-border context, have you succeeded to have young people participate in this subject? If yes, how? And if no, why? Do you have any ideas to manage to involve young people in these mechanisms?
Yes, we've ensured the participation of more than 1,500 young people on both sides of the border in cultural sport projects, in spite of all the mobility problems that we were talking about earlier that are very concerning. In 2023, after the pandemic, we expect to review our participative budget, and we're going to do it aimed just to young people. So they're going to be the ones that will decide and will vote, because we're talking about internet voting system through which young people will be able to vote and allocate those funds that the city councils are giving to them for projects that deal with the environment, with culture, with sport, with living together. On top of that, in the design that we are carrying out of the 2030 agenda, we are giving special voice to young people in several roundtables on the circular economy, sustainability, the environment, and special participation from young people on both sides of the border, because we think that they, in the end of the day, have got a younger voice, a new vision, a different way of looking at things. Surely they have less the border in mind compared to their parents or our grandparents. So in that regard, they bring a new vision, and they look at it from an innovative point of view, because in the border they see opportunities on the other side.
Sur cette question de comment on fait pour capter des jeunes et pour les impliquer.
So on this question on how to involve young people, maybe we'll speak more at a national level here to see what is, as well as what is happening across borders in the processes which you have spoken about here. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about that. Do you manage to involve young people depending on the subjects, and how do you manage to involve them as effectively as possible in the processes which you have for support?
Well, I will start by explaining what we do and who we are. Well, we are responsible for guaranteeing a right that exists in France, and that is, if there is a project that impacts your environment, for example, an airport, a motorway, or a nuclear plant, or wind farms offshore, then you have the right to be informed of the existence of that project, and you can take part in the debate involving decision making, and the initial decision in particular, i.e., should the project go ahead or not. So this is a right that has existed for the last 25 years. 500 public consultations and debates have taken place on very different projects. And the issue often arises beyond the usual suspects, of course, because we have the usual representatives in public debates, whether others whose voice is hardly ever heard, could they be involved, i.e. ordinary citizens and young people in particular. But young people, of course, are not homogeneous category. First of all, it's like the population, it's very disparate. So what type of young people do we wish to involve? Very marginalized young people, or young people who are already involved in some of the issues. So that's the first question that we need to ask, what sort of young people, and do they really wish to take part in these debates? And we have different tools evolved in order to identify this. During a public debate, we have 10 or 15 different tools that allow you to participate, because we want the debate to be as close to people as possible. So we don't have any meeting of this type of borders forum, for example, because the most marginalized young people would never take part in such a forum or meeting, quite clearly. But we had an interesting renovation project in a particular public space, and we set up a virtual system where it was possible with 3D headsets. You could well imagine the square that you were going to build. And that attracted a lot of young people. But when we said, well, why have you chosen such an option rather than another? When we asked them to fill in a questionnaire, suddenly they all wish to go home. They weren't interested. So you need to know which tool to use, and conventional tools, speaking with a microphone or filling in a questionnaire, those tools don't necessarily work. You have to choose others. And also, it's the way you present the project, i.e. project managers present the project usually in a very technical fashion. And most people, not just young people, but for most people, it goes well above their head. They don't understand the technicalities. And so we asked the managers to work on their project to make sure that the information or the presentation is made with videos, with pictures, with other tools that will be more attractive for young people. What strikes me in a public debate, all too often you exclude huge swathes of the population. And I can give you a very concrete example. In France, we said to the government, well, we can't really relaunch nuclear plants unless we have a prior debate on and the energy strategy and what place nuclear power should have within that strategy. And for this to happen, we need to organize a specific forum for young people. You have to involve future generations, because clearly young people very often have a very different view of things as their adult counterparts. So we thought it would be a good idea to create an assembly of young people made up of as many young people as there are parliamentarians. We take a symbolic figure like 150 or 170, and that those young people work with the parliamentarians, not separately, but work together in order to build up proposals together with the parliamentarians. So to answer your question, yes, public debates with young people are possible, of course, but you need to change the tools that you use. In some debates, you have young people that you might recruit on the street or chosen haphazardly. But we ask them to build those tools with us to make sure that they wish to be fully involved. Thank you. And Mrs. Ricard-Nihoul, on this question of the involvement of young people, your experience of the future of the Conference of Europe, but did you have any feedback on that particular conference? Did you find an answer to this question, how to involve young people? Well, the Conference on the Future of Europe, as its name indicates, of course, well, involved mostly young people. And as soon as the European Commission, and as you know, this is an idea that was put forward by your own president, Emmanuel Macron, but the president of the Commission, in fact, included this in her program. And from the start, she insisted on the fact that access to this debate for young people on the future of Europe it would be needed to be a must. So this is what we did with the online platform, the citizen panels, and the plenary sessions. So in terms of the citizen panels in particular, I would say that 800 people were involved, 4 panels of 200 people. And proactively, we decided to have 1/3 of young people, so a little more than the real proportion within the population. So we introduced expressly this particular bias, and whose age category was between 16 and 25. We also had young people between 16 and 18. And I must say that this was one of the most fascinating aspects of this experiment, not only because we had an opportunity to listen to young people, but to listen to the dialogue between those young people and older generations. It's interesting, of course, to have to gather young people together to deal on particular topics such as ours, very relevant, but also to sustain a dialogue between generations. And in the panels, there were a few national groupings in order that people could speak the same language, some occasionally, but it was very mixed otherwise. It wasn't young people and older people being separated, not at all. They tended to mix well together. And this is something to keep in mind. And it's important to take this particular aspect in question. So, of course, we don't know who will take part, but the sort of young people who will take part, because it's a drawing of lots, basically, to choose the young people. And in fact, this conference, in fact, is something that's going to be integrated, says the Commission, in future policies. But in terms of other dimensions for the online platform, we tried to link this to the social media in order to attract young people to that platform. During the plenary, we had 80 people coming from panels, amongst which young people of less than 18 years of age. And so they were able to interact directly with politicians who were there amongst them. So to summarize, yes, we have taken into account the youth dimension. And yes, we did draw lessons from that experience in order to try and do even better next time. And I also forgot to mention that the European Parliament every year organizes a major youth event, European Youth, this is what it's called, in fact, and which was dedicated to that conference. So we gave a special place to that event. Well, thank you. This is something that can also be imagined, of course, in the cross-border areas. To come back to the question of the obstacles to the involvement of young people, a few Slido questions have been asked. When you close a border, a physical border, when you're young and you live in a cross-border area, what sort of impact could this have on the involvement of citizens in general, and particularly young people? How do you adjust to the closure of borders? And perhaps you can tell us what you experienced when the borders were closed. But we have, in fact, someone in our audience who actually was faced with a closed border in the EU. This was during the time of COVID, when borders did shut down. And I think this is a very concrete and physical obstacle when you live in a cross-border area. The fact that you are constrained in your mobility. But Foran, perhaps you could bring a roving mic to our participants in the audience to explain exactly what happened.
Yes, thank you very much. So thank you for inviting me here. I'm Foram Gohel and I'm from India, and currently I'm studying intercultural management at the Carinthian University of Applied Sciences in Austria. Last year I had an opportunity to participate in a project called Teen for Citizens, where we had to interview people who were living at border regions or people who were affected by cross-border mobility because of the pandemic. I was also one of those victims, I could say. So I had to stay back in India because I could not get a visa or I could not apply for a visa. So I was studying in India online, from India for 1 year online. This had major implications of how my life had changed in a very challenging way, I would say. I was living in India physically, but I was mentally in Austria and in India. This was very difficult for me to exist, if I could say, because of the time difference, which exacerbated the situation, and I could not sleep at proper timings, and this had many ramifications on my mental and physical health, along with other minor inconveniences. I would say, like, I could not make friends with my colleagues here in Austria, and I felt left out. There were communication problems while doing group works, and yeah, it was quite complicated. So from my experience, I would say that we should also consider borders that are not physical, but virtual borders, and how we can make it a pleasant journey for people who are facing it. Yeah, thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Forum, sur cette question. Je ne sais pas si vous avez des réactions, je me tourne peut-être du côté de nos trois jeunes.
Thank you. I don't know if you would like to react. Our three young people in particular. And this will be perhaps the conclusion of our session. The idea is that you should have 5 minutes each to conclude. But on this issue of borders, I would like to know how you lived through the closure of borders during the COVID pandemic. What did it mean for you? And did it stop you from doing things? Bektha, you could perhaps start.
So actually in 2020, when all of this started, and as I said, I grew up in Strasbourg. For me, going to Germany, going to Belgium, Switzerland was something completely natural. Like, it's part of, there were transport. I will be honest, I am privileged in my way of living the border because I grew up in a big city, in the biggest side of the border, so I had more access than other people in surroundings to access the trains, the airports, also other convenience. I left Strasbourg after my high school to go discover the world, travel in France and also in Europe, and throughout my life I did participate in a lot of youth exchange, European programs, in and out, and actually in 2020, I was in Romania. I had just arrived, I think, about 1 week or 2 weeks before it all started, and I was supposed to be there for a few months, and suddenly the border, COVID happened, all countries started shutting down, the border completely shut down, and I'm French, so I'm an EU citizen. I live currently in the Netherlands, so I'm an EU resident in another country. And suddenly I am temporarily in another EU country. And that was a moment I like to call myself a Schengen baby. I'm under 30, so I always lived with Schengen in my mind. And suddenly I realized this weird thing of, oh, I am within the EU, I am a citizen, a resident, I am still inside the space, but I'm outside Schengen. And due to all the legislations and how it was going on, my home country, my nationality was telling me, no, you're within EU, so officially the borders are not closed, so we will not bring you back. So I was in Romania by myself. Romania, oh, you're not our citizen, you're not our resident. Okay. The Netherlands, oh, but you're a resident, you're not a citizen. You have to handle yourself. You decided to go to Romania out of Schengen. It's your choice. You're not our citizen. And then I was in this limbo of 3 countries telling me, well, here you are. It's your choice. You need to find a solution. But I didn't have a solution, because I couldn't physically take a plane, physically take a train. I was not even physically allowed to walk through the border. And that was for me quite a big revelation of how did we go from we are open, people mobility, people freedom of movement, choice of living in a place, working in another, to, hey, what do you do now? And who do I ask to? Who is in charge of me? Basically, it was a very strange feeling for me, I will be honest. But I made it back once the borders opened again. So this, for me, was very strange because people were saying, the borders are not closed, but the borders are not open. We were in between.
Ça fera un peu lien avec vos interpellations. On va se laisser le temps pour que vous puissiez aussi nous
Well,
porter.
thank you for that. Well, that is very interesting. It's very important that you should all be able to bring your own experience to this debate. And we were talking about with Madame Jouanno. In fact, it's a double, two questions that I would like to ask you. On the question of in the situation we had last year, we see the consequences that this can have in the cross-border area when borders close and the involvement of young people. But in terms of public debates, I have two questions for you. First of all, how were you able to adapt to the constraints and lockdowns that we have known, and to continue to involve young people? So we're able to adapt your mechanisms. And another issue, the public debate, did it carry on, and is it a space that allows young people to really become fully involved? And I give you 30 seconds to answer both questions. Well, you're too kind. Well, last year, of course, first of all, initially, a couple of years ago, everything was closed. We couldn't do anything at the beginning of COVID. But then we didn't want debates only to be online, because that excludes a big percentage of the population in France, certainly. And so we advocated in order to organize debates either in small workshops, because that was possible, or on radio too, because radio remains a very accessible medium, or other media, in order for the greater number to be involved. On cross-border debates, well, we have very few cross-border debates, a dozen or so. The first one in 2004, and that was the motorway going from Amiens, Lille to Belgium, or railway link towards Spain, or electrical interconnections. And very recently, we are offshore in Dunkirk, we had a wind farm project that impacted Belgium. And so the Flanders Ministry of the Sea and the La Panne commune that was directly impacted wrote to us by saying, well, hang on, there's been no public debate. And here, of course, we could say, well, a border does exist, because legally we on you a public debate in your countries and organize a public debate in your country. We have not got that right. However, we had all the documents necessary translated into Flemish. We answered all questions. And we could only answer in French, of course, but anybody could ask any question they wished. And we said, if you organize a public debate, then we can make teams available to you and will help you. But it is quite paradoxical because it was a project that impacted directly Belgium. And where there is a where people go to La Panne, the affected community, to spend their weekend. But for public debates, there is a legal obstacle. So we managed to get around it, but it wasn't particularly easy. Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, of course. Coming from a European town, I can help talking about the consequences of the closure of our borders. We lived through very traumatic times, also for our families. We have families living on both sides of the border, traumatic for work, people who were 5 minutes away from work, suddenly they were 40 kilometers away, huge financial loss for the economy. And I think the states need to find in those cross-border functional areas, whether it is a European town or an IGT or any other instrument, a place where to apply different policies. I think the states, the governments, and the places of decision taking are always too far from those borders, and I think that's one of the reasons that though the decision was taken of closing those internal borders with the European Union. It was really hard, and we hope that analysis the MOT is carrying out about the consequences of having closed those borders. In the University of Vigo, we've reached conclusions of losses of millions and millions of euros, the consequences that has brought us, and how that needs to make us reflect on the fact that we need to consolidate more our border territories. We are real labs, privileged areas to conduct those pilot projects, huge zones where new, more innovative policies can be implemented, and also, of course, with the participation of the youth.
Écoutez-les bien, parce qu'ils ont préparé leurs interpellations, ils ont des requêtes, ils ont des questions, ils ont des choses qu'ils souhaiteraient.
Well, thank you for that. On the issue of the involvement of youth in cross-border territories, unfortunately, we will have no time for any questions in the hall. But each of you three, in fact, you have the time to respond to what you've heard. Perhaps we'll start with you. Bektha, you have a maximum of 5 minutes, perhaps.
So I have actually three in one. So the first one, I would like to share with you like kind of my vision or my concern, I think, about youth involvement. I see these last few years, it's actually growing. The youth involvement and the willingness to involve young people is growing. And especially with this year, European Year of Youth, there is a specific spotlight put into young people. And I'll be honest, I am a bit worried and scared that after this year, we will leave this year with the content of, hey, we did enough, they had a whole year, but it's not enough. It's not enough. It cannot end or just be summarized by a year of youth. This year is the moment to actually bring more awareness and realize that we have been forgetting a part of the population that is actually the future. What we're doing now is what we're gonna experience in 10 years, in 20 years. And if we have to wait 20 years to actually express our own opinion, it's gonna be too late. We're already gonna be living it. And that's something I really want everybody here and online to keep in mind, that it should not stop at presenting yourself into the trend of youth. That youth should not be a trend, but should be a topic in the long run that is sustained and sustainable also, in the way of engaging young people, but on the way of involving them concretely. So please, do not forget us after December. The other one is, I have a question, and because of this concern, I do have a question. I know I will not get the answer, but please put it on Slido, on social media, anywhere. I will go look for it. My real question is, what are nowadays, and I think it does also reflect the first question you put on Slido and the answer that we got, into what is actually concretely put into place to engage. There is opportunities that are made for young people, but how do you actually reach them? How do you actually keep them close and keep them in the long run, in a way that there is a moment where there is an action, but one action should not be isolated. This action should be followed up with and broadened afterwards, and then given back to the young people to have their own leadership and their own ownership of their action. And because of that, I'm wondering, with the highlight of European Year of Youth, is what is right now, today, or this year, the mechanisms put into place to make sure it will follow up in 5 years, 10 years, and go on. And for that, I have two concrete, it's not the only one, there is more. I'm sure if we gather our brains, we will find way more ways to answer this question. The first one is out of a personal experience. I was part of a youth council when I was young in Strasbourg. It was really focused into the Strasbourg Youth Council. We had a project with other European countries, but actually what I realized recently, a couple of weeks ago, I was in Berlin and I met someone that lived across the border in Strasbourg, in Kel, and she's my age. So, and we actually were in the same European school when we were younger. I never met her, or I don't remember her at least. And I met her, and then I realized, wow, I actually never have spoken to someone, a young person from across my own border. I always, in my young age, interacted with my own side. I interacted with the other side for other things, but I actually never exchanged about my own experience and our challenges, common or not, with the other side. So I would really encourage you to create this youth-to-youth spaces for them to exchange and learn with each other, and also youth to institutions or officials to then actually listen to them and understand what are their needs and how they want to tackle them. And another one, if you don't know really how to start, there is something called Interreg Youth Manifesto. I encourage you, I don't have time, I know, encourage you to go Google it, check it out, it's 6 pages, it's really interesting and I think you will learn a lot from it. And there is a checklist of concrete actions to take on to see if you are actually actively engaging with young people. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Donc effectivement, on n'aura pas le temps de prendre des réactions. Je vous invite vraiment, si vous avez des réactions dans la salle.
Well, thank you for that. If you have any questions or comments in the hall, please raise those issues on Slido. And of course, at the end of the day, of course, if you have any answers, you can discuss this with our young people. I think that will be very useful. I now give the floor to Irune.
Well, I don't have any specific questions to put forward, but I'd like to note how important it is to convey the reality that people live on either side of the border. And in this sense, communication is very important. You need to underline this. You need to create those spaces for communication and facilitate them. Because in my case, for instance, in my university, there is a French student who has had the chance to come and study with us because she speaks Euskera, that is Basque. She doesn't speak any Spanish. So sometimes, even though we think that languages may be an obstacle, they actually also give us to bring together people from different sides of the border and create a communication and a discourse different from the ones we're used to. In the case of France, that doesn't happen only on our side. They also have borders with German, Italian-speaking countries. So often, I mean, the physical political border makes students or people living on either side of the country they have access to studies on a particular language, and often we don't realize how important it is to create those spaces for discourse, for communicate, and promoting those languages that can help unite, help us become united. Because if that is Portugal, in here it is Spain, and we don't worry because people, we don't worry about people on the other side of the border to know a little bit about the language 100 yards away from their home. That makes communication between people impossible when a space for it has not been prepared. And if we want to create areas of communication between people in a natural way, we need to turn around the way languages are managed in our borders as well, I think.
Linus, je te laisse terminer.
Ja, vielen Dank auch für diese Möglichkeit. Ich muss zugeben,
Thank
dass
you
ich
very much for this opportunity. I have to admit that this was the part I was really looking forward to in particular. It was great to have an exchange with institutional representatives on this round table. And I prepared one question that I would like to ask now, and maybe a brief introduction. Let me explain how I came up with this question. During our animation, we often used a spreadsheet that gave us an overview over different volunteer programs. And one of the columns was about the age. And I noticed that all of these programs target the same group, young people. And since I am someone who's passionate about this topic, I'm aware why that's the case, and I think it's great that you're focusing on young people. However, I often ask myself whether we shouldn't always also support older people's engagement, because young people can usually choose from different programs. They're also connected to social media and so on. But older people often have maybe reduced mobility, reduced financial means, or reduced limited technical knowledge. In addition to that, they are excluded from these programs anyway. And I believe there's two reasons why that's a shame. On the one hand, older people could benefit from their engagement themselves. They would stay more active, they are connected with other people, so it's good against loneliness. It would give them more confidence, and at the same time, they would contribute to society because they could work for a social project. Of course, that would be reduced to people who are physically able to do that work, and it would have to be work jobs that aren't too physically challenging. But that's also why a German philosopher wanted a mandatory social year before you retire. And that would be difficult on a national level. But on an international level, it's even more difficult because many people who might not have had access to these programs when they were young because they didn't exist, and they could get more intercultural experience, and that might also make them more open-minded. And especially in times of rising nationalism, climate change, this is more important than ever before. We need a cross-generational awareness for these global problems. And that also means that we need cross-generational engagement. Having said that, I would like to ask you whether you could imagine expanding these programs to older people or create new programs for older people, maybe retired people. Do you think that would be possible, or would you politically support that? Thank you.
Sur l'intergénérationnel, c'est plutôt une belle image.
It's a good image, intergenerational aspects. Thank you to all 6 of you. Thank you, Mrs. Álvarez, Mrs. Ricard-Nihoul, Mrs. Jouanno, for being with us. Thank you for our 3 young peoples. It wasn't necessarily very easy, and I think you managed to do very well.